The United States, under Donald Trump, has launched a fresh wave of tariffs on steel and aluminum, igniting a firestorm of backlash. But this time it's different. Canada and the European Union are not backing down. In a historic move, these two economic powerhouses are forging a stronger alliance to counter Trump's aggressive trade policies. Could this mark the beginning of the end for the G7? As tensions rise, trade wars threaten to spill into geopolitical conflicts, pushing NATO into a state of uncertainty. The global balance of power is shifting fast. Donald Trump is back, and so is his signature economic weapon, tariffs. In a stunning escalation of trade protectionism, the United States has announced a fresh round of tariffs, 25% on steel and additional undisclosed duties on aluminum. These measures don't just target adversaries like China. They hit close allies, including Canada and the European Union. The justification? Trump claims these tariffs are necessary to protect American jobs and industries from foreign competition. But his reasoning doesn't add up. Canada alone supplies 79% of the primary aluminum used by the U.S., a crucial material in industries ranging from automotive manufacturing to defense. European exports of steel and high-tech components play a similar role. The idea that these imports somehow harm American industries is widely disputed by economists who warn that tariffs will actually raise costs for U.S. manufacturers and consumers. But Trump isn't backing down. Instead, he's doubling down, announcing plans for a reciprocal tariff system, which would impose the same rates on imports from countries that set higher tariffs on American goods. The reaction from Canada and the EU has been swift and furious. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called the tariffs a direct attack on North American economic stability. EU leaders, led by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, have vowed immediate and decisive retaliation. The G7, once a symbol of unity among the world's most advanced economies, now stands on shaky ground. The question is, will this trade war spiral out of control? At the heart of this economic battle is a deeper political conflict. Trump's return to power signals a shift towards nationalism and economic isolationism. The European Union, on the other hand, is pushing for stronger global trade alliances, seeking stability in an increasingly volatile economic landscape. Canada finds itself caught in the middle, forced to choose between its historical ally and its economic future. But here's where things take a dramatic turn. Canada is no longer just reacting to U.S. tariffs. It's fighting back. Trudeau's government has announced plans for massive retaliatory tariffs on U.S. imports, targeting key American industries. Meanwhile, Canada is strengthening its military presence in the Arctic, sending a clear message. It will not be bullied into submission. As the crisis escalates, tensions within NATO are reaching a breaking point. With the U.S. imposing economic pain on its closest allies, many European leaders are now questioning the reliability of the American-led security alliance. Could this trade war fracture not just economic ties but military alliances as well? Canada is done playing defense. In the wake of Trump's aggressive tariff policies, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is taking decisive action, unleashing a calculated economic counterstrike against the United States. The message is clear. If Trump wants a trade war, Canada is ready to fight back. The first move: massive retaliatory tariffs. Canada has announced a 100% tariff on Tesla imports, directly targeting Elon Musk, one of Trump's key allies. This isn't just a symbolic gesture. Tesla relies on the Canadian market, and the impact could be severe. But Trudeau's government isn't stopping there. Canada is planning broader tariffs on American steel, aluminum, and key agricultural products, aiming to hit the U.S. economy where it hurts. If Trump thought Canada would roll over, he miscalculated. But trade isn't the only battlefield. National defense is now part of the equation. With Trump openly questioning NATO, suggesting that countries like Canada should pay more for their protection, Canadian leaders are making it clear that they are prepared to stand on their own.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has unveiled an aggressive defense strategy, signaling a major shift in Canada's military priorities. His plan includes the construction of a new Arctic military base, reinforcing Canada's presence in a region that is becoming increasingly strategic due to growing Russian activity and climate change opening new shipping routes. Doubling the Inuit Rangers, Canada's first line of defense in the north, from 2,000 to 4,000 personnel, enhancing surveillance and response capabilities.
Acquiring 2 additional polar icebreakers, a move that would give Canada an edge in Arctic military operations. This is a direct response to Trump's dismissal of Canada's sovereignty and security needs. By boosting its Arctic presence, Canada is also sending a message to Russia and China, both of whom have shown increasing interest in the region's resources and trade routes. The funding for these military expansions? Poilievre has proposed a dramatic reduction in foreign aid spending, arguing that billions of Canadian taxpayer dollars should be redirected toward national defense rather than wasteful international programs. This policy is controversial, but it resonates with Canadians who feel their country has been too dependent on U.S. military support. Meanwhile, Canada is forging new economic alliances. Recognizing the volatility of relying too heavily on U.S. trade, Canada is shifting focus toward Europe and the Indo-Pacific. This strategy isn't just about trade, it's about survival in a world where traditional alliances are being redefined. At the center of this new economic push is the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement with the European Union. Since its provisional implementation in 2017, CETA has steadily increased trade between Canada and the EU. Now, with Trump escalating trade tensions, Canada is accelerating efforts to deepen this partnership. During a recent visit to Brussels, Canadian Trade Minister Mary Ong made it clear Canada is actively seeking to reduce its dependence on the U.S. market. This includes expanding trade incentives for small and medium-sized businesses to export to Europe, investing in renewable energy collaboration with the EU, positioning Canada as a leading supplier of critical minerals like nickel, lithium, and uranium, negotiating streamlined regulations for Canadian businesses and European markets, ensuring that Canada's economy remains competitive. This shift is more than just an economic maneuver. It's a strategic realignment that reflects the new reality of global trade. If Trump continues down the path of economic nationalism, Canada won't be left behind. Instead, it will stand shoulder to shoulder with Europe, building a trade bloc that could challenge U.S. economic dominance. But how will the U.S. respond? Will Trump escalate further, or will this pushback force him to reconsider? Trump's tariff war isn't just a battle with Canada. It's now igniting a full-scale economic showdown with Europe. The European Union, one of the largest trading blocs in the world, is preparing to strike back with its own set of aggressive countermeasures. And this time, the response will be swift, strategic, and devastating for key American industries. The European Commission has already condemned the new U.S. tariffs as unfair and unjustified, warning that they will not go unanswered. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has vowed to impose retaliatory tariffs on iconic American exports, just as the EU did during Trump's first tariff war in 2018. But this time, the stakes are higher, and the EU is ready to escalate further. First on the list of targeted products are American agricultural exports, including corn, soybeans, and beef, industries that heavily rely on European markets. This is a direct strike at Trump's voter base in the Midwest, a region that suffered the most during previous trade disputes. By squeezing American farmers, the EU is putting political pressure on Washington, knowing that these retaliatory tariffs could have serious consequences for Trump's re-election campaign. But it doesn't stop there. European leaders are also preparing tariffs on high-profile American consumer goods such as bourbon, motorcycles, and jeans. These products were carefully chosen to hit industries in politically significant U.S. states, including Kentucky and Wisconsin, where Trump has strong support. This is not just about economics. This is economic warfare designed to make Trump feel the pressure domestically, in addition to direct tariffs The EU is now reconsidering its approach to regulating American tech giants. For years, US companies like Meta, Alphabet, and Apple have enjoyed lucrative access to European markets. But that access could soon be restricted under a new wave of digital regulations that would impose heavy compliance costs on American firms. The EU's Digital Markets Act and Digital Services Act have already tightened control over major tech corporations, and now, with tensions rising, European leaders are exploring additional regulatory measures that could directly impact the dominance of Silicon Valley. Another powerful tool at the EU's disposal is its anti-coercion instrument, a mechanism designed to counteract economic threats from foreign powers. Under this framework, the EU could block American companies from bidding on European government contracts, cutting off access to billions of dollars in infrastructure and defense spending. This would be a major blow to US firms that rely on European markets, especially in the aerospace and defense industries. At the same time, European policymakers are looking to strengthen trade ties with Canada as an alternative to US economic uncertainty. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement (CETA) has already set the stage for deepening economic integration between Canada and the EU, and now both sides are exploring ways to expand cooperation. Canada is a major supplier of key raw materials needed for Europe's growing clean energy sector, including lithium, nickel, and aluminum. By strengthening these trade ties, the EU is reducing its reliance on American imports and reinforcing its economic independence. French President Emmanuel Macron has been particularly vocal in his opposition to Trump's tariffs, warning that protectionist policies will backfire and ultimately weaken the global economy. In a recent speech, he emphasized that the EU must stand firm against economic coercion, stating that Europe cannot allow the US to dictate global trade rules. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz echoed this sentiment, warning that if the US continues to escalate trade tensions, the EU is prepared to retaliate with equal force. One of the most critical questions now is whether the EU will reactivate its previous tariff list or take an even more aggressive approach. During the last tariff war, the EU targeted politically sensitive American industries, but this time, the retaliation could extend further. The possibility of introducing a digital services tax, which had been suspended in favor of global negotiations, is back on the table. If implemented, this tax would significantly impact US tech giants operating in Europe, further escalating tensions between Washington and Brussels. The transatlantic alliance is at a crossroads. For decades, the US and Europe have maintained a close economic partnership, but Trump's aggressive trade policies are pushing that relationship to the breaking point. The EU's response is no longer just about retaliating against tariffs. It's about sending a clear message that Europe will not be bullied into submission. Canada has had enough. After years of enduring Trump's erratic trade policies, Ottawa is no longer willing to play nice. The latest round of US tariffs has pushed Canada to take a stand, not just with retaliatory tariffs, but with a broader strategy that could redefine its economic and military alliances. This time, Canada is hitting back hard, and the consequences for US-Canada relations could be severe. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has made it clear Canada will not be intimidated by American protectionism. In a bold response, the Canadian government is preparing a powerful package of retaliatory tariffs designed to inflict maximum economic pain on key US industries. Just as the EU has targeted politically significant American exports, Canada is taking a strategic approach, focusing on industries that will put direct pressure on Washington. The first wave of tariffs will target US steel, aluminum, and auto parts, three sectors that are deeply intertwined with both the Canadian and American economies. But this time, Canada is escalating further by expanding its list to include agricultural products, consumer goods, and even energy exports. Canadian officials have already signaled their intention to impose tariffs on US dairy, beef, and pork, striking at American farmers who depend on Canadian markets. This is a direct challenge to Trump's rural voter base, sending a message that his protectionist policies will have real economic consequences at home. But Canada's response isn't just about tariffs.
Ottawa is also reconsidering its energy exports to the United States. For decades, Canada has been one of the largest suppliers of oil and natural gas to the U.S., with pipelines like Keystone XL playing a critical role in American energy security. Now, with trade tensions escalating, Canadian leaders are exploring ways to redirect energy exports to Europe and Asia, reducing dependence on U.S. buyers. This shift could be a major blow to American refiners, who rely heavily on Canadian crude to keep costs low. At the same time, Canada is strengthening its economic ties with Europe and other allies. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with the EU, is now seen as more than just a trade deal. It's a strategic shield against U.S. economic aggression. European leaders, frustrated with Washington's trade policies, are eager to deepen economic cooperation with Canada, creating a powerful counterweight to American influence.
Discussions are already underway to expand joint investment in key sectors like renewable energy, rare minerals, and defense manufacturing. And then there's the military angle. Trump's trade war isn't just damaging economic ties. It's also raising serious questions about North American security cooperation. Canada has long been a key partner in NATO and NORAD, working closely with the U.S. on continental defense. But Trump's increasingly hostile rhetoric, combined with his threats to reduce U.S. military support for allies who don't pay their fair share, has forced Canada to rethink its defense strategy. In response, Trudeau's government is accelerating plans to strengthen Canada's military capabilities. Ottawa has already announced a major increase in defense spending, including investments in new fighter jets, warships, and advanced missile defense systems. There is growing talk of Canada pursuing a more independent defense policy, one that relies less on American support and more on partnerships with European and Indo-Pacific allies. At the heart of this shift is a fundamental question. Can Canada continue to trust the U.S. as a reliable economic and security partner? Trump's trade war has created a deep sense of uncertainty in Ottawa, and for the first time in decades, Canadian leaders are openly discussing the possibility of diversifying away from American influence. This doesn't mean cutting ties completely, but it does mean reducing dependence on Washington and strengthening alternative alliances. The stakes are enormous. If Canada and the EU successfully deepen their economic and defense cooperation, it could mark the beginning of a major realignment within the Western Alliance. The U.S. has long assumed that its allies would fall in line with its policies, but Trump's trade war is proving that assumption wrong. Canada is no longer waiting for Washington to change course. It's taking its own path forward, with or without American support. As tensions escalate, one thing is becoming clear. The global order is shifting. Will Trump's aggressive trade policies push Canada and the EU closer together, creating a new economic and military bloc that challenges U.S. dominance? Or will Washington realize the cost of alienating its closest allies before it's too late? The world is watching, and the consequences of this trade war are no longer just about tariffs and economic losses. What began as a dispute over trade imbalances has spiraled into a geopolitical crisis, threatening the very foundation of the Western Alliance. The US, Canada, and the EU, once seen as pillars of global economic and military stability, are now drifting apart, raising the question, is this the beginning of the end for the G7? For decades, the G7 has represented the world's most powerful economies, a group bound not only by economic interests but by shared democratic values. But Trump's relentless push for tariffs, his attacks on NATO, and his open hostility toward allies have shattered that unity. The tensions playing out now are not just about economic disputes. They signal a deeper rupture, one that could have lasting consequences for the global order. One of the most immediate effects of this escalating trade war is the growing sense of uncertainty in global markets. Investors are rattled, corporations are scrambling to adjust supply chains, and industries that once relied on stable transatlantic trade relationships are now being forced to reconsider their future. The auto industry, in particular, is in chaos. With tariffs driving up the cost of raw materials, manufacturers in Canada, the EU, and even the US are warning of massive job losses and production slowdowns. What was once a seamless North American and European supply chain is now being torn apart by political brinkmanship. Meanwhile, the EU's retaliatory tariffs are beginning to bite. European leaders, furious at Washington's economic aggression, have imposed heavy tariffs on American goods ranging from agricultural products to industrial machinery. American farmers, already struggling from previous trade disputes with China, now find themselves caught in yet another economic crossfire. Trump has promised aid packages to offset the damage, but these are short-term fixes for a crisis that could have long-term consequences for American exports. And then there's the military fallout. The divide between the U.S. and its allies isn't just economic. It's also raising serious questions about the future of Western defense alliances. Trump's repeated threats to withdraw support from NATO, his demands for European nations to increase defense spending, and his unpredictable foreign policy have forced Canada and the EU to reconsider their security strategies. European leaders, long reliant on American military backing, are now openly discussing ways to build a stronger independent defense network. French President Emmanuel Macron has pushed for the creation of a European army, while Germany has increased its military budget, signaling a shift away from traditional US-led security arrangements. For Canada, the situation is just as critical. With the US increasingly unreliable as a defense partner, Ottawa is strengthening ties with European and Indo-Pacific allies. Defense agreements with the UK, France, and Japan are expanding, and Canada is considering deeper cooperation with NATO's European members outside of US influence. If this trend continues, it could mark the beginning of a new defense bloc, one that no longer revolves around Washington's leadership. But the biggest question looming over all of this is what happens to the G7 itself. The group, once a symbol of Western unity, is now fractured by trade wars, political disagreements, and diverging global strategies. The upcoming G7 summit is already shaping up to be one of the most contentious in history. Will leaders find a way to mend these growing rifts, or will the divisions deepen even further? Trump's America First policy has forced the world into a new reality, one where allies are no longer certain of Washington's commitments. Canada and the EU have responded by forging stronger ties with each other, while also exploring partnerships beyond traditional Western alliances. China, Russia, and emerging economies are watching closely, ready to exploit these divisions for their own strategic gains. If the US, Canada, and the EU cannot find a way to reconcile their differences, the balance of power on the global stage could shift in ways that were once unimaginable. The G7 may survive this crisis, but it will not emerge unchanged. The economic and political fractures exposed by Trump's trade war are too deep to ignore. The world is entering a new era, one where old alliances are tested and new power structures begin to take shape. Will the US recognize the cost of alienating its closest allies, or is this the moment where the Western alliance begins to unravel? One thing is certain. The decisions made in the coming months will shape the course of global politics for years to come. Share your T5 Hots in the comments section and subscribe our channel for more USA and Canada updates. Thank you.